There's no question, that without the Salvation Army, I certainly wouldn't be sitting in this chair today. I would be either dead or I would be in prison for the rest of my life.
Jeff and I have been friends for a long time, and we have done grade school, high school, and college together.
He's got a huge heart. He's got great friends, but he's also a great friend.
I met Jeff in elementary school in our fourth grade teacher's class, Miss Dyer.
Jeff's dad's been a very integral part in all of those activities.
George is a great father, and Jeff was very proud of his dad. George never missed a game, never missed anything. Had all the boys come to our house.
Jeff was blessed with something that not all of us had. He had good size. He was 6'4", 210, 215 pounds, fast.
Jeff played, I think, football, basketball, baseball. We also stayed friends into our college years. Jeff and I were roommates at University of Arizona, where he started a football.
I got to University of Arizona, and I started drinking and using marijuana when just right after my mother committed suicide. My earliest memories, of my mother is her teaching me the love of animals. We would go horseback riding. She grew up on a ranch, and she loved dogs. We used to call her Dr. Doolittle. We thought that she could talk to the animals. She was my biggest supporter. She didn't like me playing football. She thought I was going to get hurt. She wasn't very supportive of football, but she was always supportive of me. There was no question in my mind that I had unconditional love from her 100% of the time. The phone rang, and I knew that something horrible had happened to my mother. So my father fielded the phone call, told my stepmother, who came out into the hallway, where we met in the hallway because I'm trying to find out what's going on. And my stepmother, I remember her saying, "It's your mother." And I said, "I know."
It was a terrible thing to have to tell him. Luckily, he had all those friends. They were little kids then. Jeff cried, but not long. Yeah, really not long.
My first tragedy really had come into my life. And if you look at a timeline, I never tied it together, but if you look at a timeline, my mother, takes her life, and then within weeks, I'm experimenting with alcohol and marijuana. And then that escalated with marijuana, mostly marijuana in college. And then once I got into the brokerage industry, it just escalated slowly, and I wouldn't say that I became addicted until I was into my mid to late 20s, and then it became a problem.
Yeah, I would say he was living large. He had purchased a nice BMW sedan.
He made so much money. He's so bright. Made so much money. He made way too much money for someone that age.
Life came easy because the niche that I found was a real moneymaker, not only for my clients, but for myself.
And that's not always easy to do unless you are driven to do that, and Jeff certainly was driven.
For 8 or 9 years, I was pretty glued to the business. I took one 2-week vacation in 8 or 9 years of trading securities.
Jeff was very successful.
They had a top 10 list of traders that was circulated throughout our firm, and we had probably 350 brokers in our firm. And consistently for 5 or 6 years, I was on the top 10.
He was running with a crowd of gamblers to begin with. I mean, a lot of the guys in financial services, securities, trading were, playing hard, making money, working hard. And I think that's when, he really started participating in, more serious recreational drugs.
What changed was that I was no longer using cocaine like sniffing cocaine or that's how you intake it. And I went to smoking cocaine or freebasing cocaine. And that was an extremely quick downward spiral. I lost the job almost immediately. And then I lost my housing. At one point, I lost my car. I lost relationships with family members. And I went from functioning to non-functioning very quickly. And it wasn't long before I was living on the streets of Phoenix, living in a bush. And people always give me kind of the look of, and I'm like, hey, it was a nice bush. You know, that was my bush. It was in a high demand area. Yeah, it's empty now. It has been cleared out, but they had a lot of big, tall bushes that were very similar to this right over here. So that's the size of the bushes here. I think they got rid of the bushes because it attracted the homeless to this area. You know, it's a funny thing, if you have drugs, it's not bad to be homeless because you're medicating your surroundings and you're just medicating the horrific, you know, experiences that you're putting yourself through. So if you don't have drugs, living in a bush really sucks. It's really a horrible place to be. I was either repulsive to people, I was invisible, which is the worst. Non-existence is invisible. I'd rather somebody respond in anger and have them yell at me to, you know, get a job or take a shower or what have you, than have someone that didn't see you, like you didn't exist. You're not there. You don't matter to the world. This is an alley that I used to sleep in, and it's not unusual for most of the alleys that homeless people may live in. Since I was here, they've gotten rid of a lot of the vegetation because what I was looking for is an opportunity to be hidden, to not be seen.
I thought he's going to die out there, especially when he was homeless.
And that's where I felt really apart from and not really part of that whole prison homeless crowd, is that I was given every gift that God could bestow on somebody. I had a good family, I had a good education, I had athletic abilities, I had great friends, and yet I screwed it all up.
It was frightening. We couldn't ever reach him, or we didn't know where he was.
And he was in the house. He'd broken a window and gone in, and he acted like here, you know, no big deal for him, I'm here. And well, what it was, he really thought, I'll go home and my mom's gonna feel so sorry for me that she's gonna get me all cleaned up, feed me, and I'll get some rest for a day or two. And then I'll just, you know, I'm leaving. Well, we got there and he'd broken the window and he was in there, so I called the police and I had him arrested. And it was awful, but I did. And George went along with me. He said, we have to do something. So Jeff, the police were there, and Jeff was very angry at me. And they took him away, and I thought I was just gonna die.
It is against the law to be homeless. If you fall asleep in a city park, then you can be arrested for that. So I was being arrested and released quite often. I was kind of a catch and release guy in the beginning. But one thing about addiction, and as you become more and more desperate, as your behavior becomes more and more and more desperate and escalating in the level of crime that you're doing. But one thing you learn in jail is you don't eat your grapefruit because it's your pillow on the floor. So I use that as a pillow. So that's where my addiction had really brought me, was, you know, using a grapefruit for a pillow, eating, you know, jail food and looking forward to it because I hadn't eaten in quite a while. You really don't, I think the feeling that you have is that you may not see freedom ever again. It may be that this is going to be what it's like for the rest of your life. You come in here, you don't know what you're being charged with for quite some time, and you might be coming into a situation where it may be years before you will have any sort of freedom from that point on. And it's just like a cell you would see in television. You know, it's a small cell about as big as your bed. You have a little slot that you can receive your food through. And then a stainless steel bathroom in there, and that's your cell. And so I became very angry. For the first time in my life, I couldn't blame anybody for why I was there. God had blessed me with a good mind, an athletic ability, a good family, a fantastic career, and I found myself homeless, living on the streets, hopeless. And it got me there. My decisions, my best thinking got me there, and it made me very angry. And I was there for maybe 60 days, and all of a sudden I became very ill. And I just didn't eat. I didn't eat for 30 days, not a bite of food. And so I'm very weak, I'm in a very weakened state, and they brought me out and gave me some tests, took some blood, put me back in the cell block, And then a few days later, the test came back and I was brought into a room. All of these people were there, and I'm thinking, this doesn't really look too good. And the sheriff was visibly shaken. I think I even detected that he was quite emotional and tearing in his eyes. And he said, "Jeff, I don't want to put this on any one of my staff, but your test came back that you are HIV positive." I didn't care because drugs and alcohol have robbed me of my ability to care. I was just told that I was going to die in prison of AIDS. That's when God decided to reveal himself to me. And I get the question all the time, how do you explain that moment? And the only way I can explain it is, I used to be very frightened of like thunderstorms when I was a little boy, like 3 or 4 years old. And I remember, walking into my parents' room just with my big stuffed animal, and my father would let me jump into bed with him, and I would all of a sudden feel two things. I would feel loved, and I would feel secure. And take that feeling and times it times 100. And it just this undeniable rush of love and security. And that was God's love and security. And the message that I got from God at that point is that everything's going to be okay. No matter what happens, I am here, I have never left you, everything is going to be okay. In the end, just miracles started to occur. I was brought out of that cell. I spent 30 days in that isolation cell. And some more tests were run. Miracle number 1, I come out into the same room, same sheriff, and the sheriff says, "We have found that you don't have AIDS. We don't know what it is, but we know it's not AIDS." And I went into the hospital for about 4 days. I was shackled to the bed, and they were giving me some vitamin supplements and whatnot. I was very ill at the time. And I remember when I come back from the hospital, now I'm facing sentencing. And the judge was a very wise judge. Now, I had been arrested, 4, 5, 6 times by that time, and it was never addressed in the court system. My drug problem was never addressed. And so this judge looks at what they call your jacket, and he's looking at it and he's like, "I think this kid's got a drug problem." See, I didn't have any drug charges, but everything I was doing was drug motivated. So he came up with a plan to divert me to long-term residential drug treatment and to release me, and to use his influence with the county prosecutor in such a fashion that they would not send me to prison if I did well in treatment. So kind of hanging this over my head. We're going to see how you do in treatment. So I was released and sentenced to the Salvation Army drug treatment program called Harbor Light.
Jeff was given a choice by the judge. It was either go to prison or go to the Salvation Army.
And he chose the Salvation Army, not knowing what he was getting himself into.
I met Jeff when he was sentenced and released into treatment from jail to intensive probation approximately 19 years ago.
He seemed to be more articulate, but he was messed up.
He was scared. He was very afraid that the battle that he was fighting with his addiction was going to win.
He did resist it.
During those days, it was very difficult for him. And in fact, having been a man of some means, to have to come to the Salvation Army, be assigned to wash dishes for everyone else on the program, that was a really difficult time for him.
It's almost like, these counselors are so patient because you're such an idiot. And you really are. You're just an idiot, and that you just close off. And the brain does that too, is that we close off things that to protect ourselves, from tragedies or from different trauma, especially as children.
But what it did for him is brought him some backbone. It caused him to think about his life. And as he worked through that time, he also had classes with us, and he began to learn about alcoholism, drug addiction. He began to learn about himself.
So it was pointed out to me that, gee, you hadn't done drugs. You're almost 20 years old. You've never done an illegal drug. You've drank on a few occasions. And here, 2 weeks after your mother's death, you're smoking pot and drinking. And I thought that there was no correlation. I was using drugs and altering reality for a reason. In the end, it was anything but reality. I could not get up in the morning and make it to the restroom without using drugs in between. That's how bad it had gotten. So anything but reality. And the Salvation Army taught me that reality is pretty cool. You know, when you have a relationship with God and you're in good physical condition and you're getting up in the morning and you're doing a chore and you're doing it well, you feel very accomplished. And the Salvation Army realizes that.
Whether or not he had the right to have a better life was a question for him. He didn't believe in himself at all. He was pretty well convinced that the things that had brought him to that place in his life had taken away his right to live well.
We said to him, we have real trust in you. We have real interest in your being successful and well. And he began to believe in himself. He began to believe that he could change.
He had an impact on the community within the treatment center, immediately started to identify ways where he could contribute to the treatment process, to the program, and specifically to the lives of the women and children that were in Harbor Light, in residence at Harbor Light. And he took his skills and turned that into a program that saved people's lives. And I think saved Jeff's life, quite honestly.
The Salvation Army has been doing this for a long time. They've been treating alcohol problems since 1865. They know what they're doing. Your entire person is treated. You have a physical person, a spiritual person, and an emotional person. So you get behavioral health care for the emotional side. The physical side, we were very active. We played softball on the weekends. We had weights we could work out with. And then you have the spiritual side. And developing a relationship with God is the key. There's a saying in long-term recovery manuals that go way back that say no human power could relieve us of our addiction or alcoholism. The longer that you're engaged in treatment, then the higher degree of success, and if you add to that Christ-centered treatment, then that even adds to that success. So the best model out there was also the only available bed to me, Salvation Army. And it changed and saved my life. 18 years ago, and I still can feel the emotion of just relief of walking into the doors of the Harbor Light facility. It's just God's property, and you just feel that same security and that you're loved and people don't judge you. And believe me, I was being judged by a lot of people at that time. Because once again, how could you have done this to yourself? You know, you had great successes, and how could you, be in the position that you're in? And they never asked me that. They said, the first day I was there, that we're going to love you until you learn to love yourself. And that's exactly what occurred.
And probably more importantly than anything else, his commitment and presence in the life of his son. And that is something that I've had a front row seat to watch, the challenges and the struggles that he's been through to be a dad and to be a good dad and to be the guy that people want to be when they're dealing with their children. I have huge respect for Jeff because of that.
Riley is a character. He looks like he just came right out of like a mini-me, and he's never really known his father to be under the influence. If you would ask my son, he is very grateful to the Salvation Army that his father is emotionally available, physically available. I've been at all of his sporting events. I may have missed one, and he's at the age now where he kind of looks and he's like, well, it's okay if you come or not come, but he's watching the door, and then he's all embarrassed, when I'm there. But if you were to ask my son, he couldn't put a dollar value on that. If you were to ask my parents, you can't put it. How do you thank an organization that restores you from the brink of death?
We know we can't do it all, but we were able to do it with Jeff. And we just appreciate the opportunity to have done that.
We really found some really exciting things were going on in his life, including we put him in charge of our daycare program that we had here for many years.
I was then sent back to school, to college, and I was sent back by the Salvation Army because they had a vision of opening up a nursery within the rehab because mothers were having to give up their children to foster care in order to seek drug treatment. And the Salvation Army didn't want to separate the mother and the infant child. So they wanted to open this nursery, and they sent me back to school because they thought that I would be the man to run it. Man to run a nursery.
He loves kids. He really loves kids. And he's helped a lot of children, and he's worked with a lot of children. And he used to work at Harbor Light in the daycare. He ran the daycare there.
So I went back to college. I got a 4.0 in college, straight A's. I never got A's, in college. And was able to come back and open up the Herberger Child Care Center. And it was a resounding success. It had never been done before. It was for children of homeless and drug-addicted parents. And we had 28 drug-free babies born there. Each drug-addicted baby can cost the state of Arizona $500,000 just to reach school age. And I remember there was one little girl, Jordan, that came in. Jordan's parents were addicted. They were living in a car. She came in July, and she was totally shut down. She wouldn't sleep because her parents would disappear. She wouldn't eat because she was so emotionally rocked. And so she sat in my office. We had a wall full of these stuffed animals. And so one day, after about a week, Jordan lifted her finger and she pointed at one of the animals. And so I went up to the animal, I grabbed this bear, and I'm like, this one? And Jordan's like, and I'm like, Jordan, I am so pleased that you picked this bear because of all of these bears, this is the only one that doesn't have a name. And that was the start of Jordan's restoration. I said she named the bear, and within a few weeks, she was a normal toddler running around, eating and sleeping, and really feeling safe and secure. That same feeling that I got when God decided to reveal himself to me. I was at the nursery from approximately 1997 until 2001. Some of my responsibilities expanded beyond the nursery from 2000 to 2001, and I was a community liaison. And so I was just then starting to educate the public and mainly our elected officials on the effectiveness of a program like this.
I was the executive director at the Phoenix Rescue Mission, and I went to a neighborhood meeting, a community meeting. All of a sudden, this young man stood up in the back, and he just walked up there, and he talked as if he knew something about homelessness. And so when the meeting was over, I couldn't wait to go meet him because he spoke eloquently and with great authority. It was Jeff.
I ran into Jerry Sandvig of the Phoenix Rescue Mission, and Jerry and I shared the same vision, and that was to build a facility similar to the Harbor Light facility that unfortunately had to be closed in 2001 because of a lack of funding.
The relationship, as I told you, started out with that community meeting, and then through our work together at the mission.
They entrusted Jerry's organization, which was the Phoenix Rescue Mission, they gifted the property to him, and they gave him the seed money to start what is now a tremendous 200-bed facility like no other in the state of Arizona.
And so now you find the building, property here, with the residential units, Women and Children's Center, and preschoolers. Then the main center, which has dining hall and all that in it, and of course the chapel. He could speak so passionately to groups that we met with, foundations and others, about how these funds were going to be used.
There's no question that God put Jerry and I together because what Jerry's good at, I'm not very good at. And what I'm good at, Jerry's not very good at. But together, we had the skills combined that got this facility built.
That Harbor Light program did absolute wonders in his life, which then just has grown out now to serve so many other people.
He came back to work for us because, as I said, we wanted him to do a part of the program that we had for children here. He didn't immediately go out and get a car. He couldn't afford it, so he bought himself a bicycle, and he rode back and forth on his bicycle.
And I remember the first couple of times I went out on the bike, my butt hurt, and it was hot, and it was just not a great experience. And then I just got acclimated to the heat and started riding that bike everywhere. And I just got a better bike, and pretty soon I'm riding quite a bit, I would go on the weekend, I would go on a 100-mile ride. Obviously, I don't have an off switch.
So he started riding a bike because that was his only means of transportation. Well, it wasn't too long after that, to my earlier point, now Jeff was racing, winning.
I was a middle of the pack guy, you know, in the beginning, and then I worked my way up to where I was finishing what's called on the podium, which is first, second, or third. So I've won 2 state championships here in the state of Arizona in mountain biking and 1 national championship, which is the largest cycling event, I believe, in the United States.
It was Jeff in our mountain biking and my mother's illness of cancer where he began to say, hey, you know, what's your mom's middle name? We want to pray for her at our Bible study.
I'd been teaching Bible study to young men in the program, so I knew I couldn't stumble too much, or if I did, I would apologize and get the right answer. Anyway, so Jeff sat in on some of those as well. But then he said, you know, I have some friends that would like to have a Bible study. In fact, one of them really needs some help in accepting the Lord.
I was faithful, but I wasn't practicing my faith.
At the end of the climb, I remember getting off the bike and looking at him, taking off our helmets, and we're drinking water, and I said to him, you know, I don't know what to tell you, Jeff, but God does. God knows the solution to this problem. He did.
I owe my walk with the Lord, which started at that point, to Jeff and to what he did for me.
He started seeking the Lord's guidance, wisdom, and direction, and now we go to a Bible study every Thursday.
It's been going on for 12 years. And the neat thing about this is not only have I watched Jeff grow in his spiritual understanding of the Bible and life and the applications, but he's got these friends of his that they went to school together, grade school, junior high, high school, and a couple to college together. And so we've been doing that all these years. And it's just been a wonderful experience.
I think when God has blessed your life beyond measure, as He has blessed mine, that we have an obligation. We have an obligation to give others hope. We have an obligation to teach others what we have been taught. We have an obligation to give freely what was so freely given to us. So I try, and I know I fall short all the time, but I try to help people navigate through addiction, through their children, through their families, even in the courtrooms. I'm well known in Superior Court of Arizona, where I have come to many, many sentencings over the years, diverting people into drug treatment, like the Salvation Army ARC program. Self-supporting drug treatment, 6 months residential treatment, just like I received. And the judges have been awesome.
And once people start to see their own self-interest is at stake here, they begin to listen to you more. And Jeff, I think, embodies that, because people can see, oh, this guy was in there. He was one of the people we're talking about. And now here he is in my office talking very articulately about the policies and how it's, you know, how we can affect positive change.
I'd gone down to the legislature and spoken to several subcommittees on some alternatives to incarceration, and mainly in drug treatment, using, you know, my example of my personal life. And having been through it brings you credibility there. I think that our legislators are fascinated and they want to learn some alternatives. So I kind of developed, I think, a small niche reputation down there as having some solutions. And so I was summoned by Mark Anderson, invited in to discuss and help form a bill that later became what's called 1291.
Senate Bill 1291, the Prison Transition Bill, is a great example of a piece of legislation that helps real people and at the same time actually saves money for the state. And so it's one of those that I feel actually will make a difference.
It's the only early release program in the state of Arizona. It is for people just like me that were nonviolent drug offenders, repeat offenders even, and that it offers drug treatment, safe housing upon release, education, job skills training, job placement, parenting classes if you're a parent. So all the things that you don't have or are provided to you once you are released from prison. And as a result, the statistics say that the rearrest rate has been lowered by more than half, 62% less in the first year of rearrest rates. What if you equate that to public safety? That's increasing public safety and decreasing our time in prisons. So you have a cost savings here and a benefit to the community in public safety.
Jeff was just ideal. We couldn't have asked for a better spokesman. And of course, his own experience was part of that appeal, because nobody could say, well, you don't know what it's really like. He knew what it was really like in all respects, from the beginning of being a law-abiding, successful person to crashing and serving time.
By my experience, in the last cell block that I was in, of the 35 men that were in there, 34 were there on drug or drug-motivated charges. So they had a drug problem. So it became very evident to me that in the state of Arizona, you know, we don't have a, let's say, prison or crime problem, prison overcrowding problem. What we have is a drug problem, and we need to address the drug problem.
And many of them are still dealing with the addiction issue, because the addiction issue is not solved in prison.
I looked at the disparity between what we're spending on treatment, which is what I received, and what we're spending to incarcerate people. And that's when the lights came on. And something needed to be done where our legislators and our lawmakers that help funnel these funds, that they needed to be educated. And I found that they love to be educated on this subject. They're very open to finding out the experiences that I have had and how we can use those experiences to benefit others.
So I'd say that he was probably invaluable, extremely helpful in telling the story and getting the message out and educating people about the policy and why we need a prison transition program and what the good effects of that would be.
We have gone into a period of mass incarceration in the United States of America. We have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, by far. And there are studies that indicate that violent crime is going down. So that tells me that we're locking up a lot of nonviolent drug offenders.
Substance abuse is probably the most significant thing that leads people to crime.
How do you do a drug-motivated crime if you don't do drugs? Alcohol, by far, is more violent than all the other drugs combined, and it's our only legal drug. And it leads to domestic violence, no question. Homelessness is certainly just a symptom of drug addiction or alcoholism. There's a tremendous cost savings, not only in human costs, but in financial costs, and it increases public safety because you are treating the core issue of why people go to prison in the first place. When I think about Senate Bill 1291, as it has given literally thousands of other young men and women in this state the same opportunity that I received. It's the only early release program. Whenever you release somebody from prison, you need to have a law, and a law is a bill. And the language of the bill allows for people to be released early, and they earn that release by having good behavior and doing things that they're supposed to be doing. They have to have clean drug tests in prison. They have to start changing the behavior, and then they're released early into drug treatment, parenting classes. The Salvation Army provides clothing, transportation, food to the individuals that are getting out, because in the state of Arizona, you are basically just released into the community with gate money, it's called, and it's either $50 or $100 of gate money. That's our transitional program without 1291. And 1291 is a case-managed program where people come out and they are managed through recovery, as I was. And since the inception of the bill in 2003, I think about 10,000 people have been released from prison early. And what's more really compelling on supporting this legislation is that it has cut recidivism rates or rearrest rates in half. So our community is much safer. So it has what I call the trifecta. We save money, we reduce our prison population, and we increase public safety. Not to mention that people get to be back with their families and be a clean and sober parent to their families, as I am to mine.
The reality is that funding for addiction and alcoholism is usually not real popular with people because people just don't like to talk about it.
It's not an easy message for a lot of people. They don't want to hear that people in prison could actually become good people and could actually be contributing members of society, because it goes against what their view is, that these people are hopeless. And so it's a tough message.
But the more and more that people are more aware of what's going on, Jeff has been able to carry a message, and it's hard to tell how many people's lives he's touched by the work he's done behind the scenes.
Going to a prison cell is easy. You lay around, you don't have to do much, you read, you can go out to the rec yard, or it's not a very demanding life. You're just kind of warehoused. It's like human warehousing. And one thing that I experienced on more than one occasion is that I was released with the same drug problem that I was arrested with. Only on a prison yard, I picked up a lot of new skills on how to be a better drug addict. Not the skills that are beneficial to society once I get out. Whereas at the Salvation Army, we were up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we had to do chores. We had to make our beds. We couldn't be on our beds during the daytime. We had to go to groups. We had to write and journal and do all of these things that kind of got out of us those things that we like to keep hidden. And there's a saying that you're only as sick as your secrets are. And so there's no secrets in recovery. So there are different ways of getting that out, getting it out of your mind onto a piece of paper, delivering it to a class. So that was hard work, and I really want to emphasize how difficult it is. This is not an easy program. But the rewards are just immeasurable. They don't have bounds. Sending me to a prison cell would have cost the state of Arizona, if I got 6 years in prison, that would be $150,000. And the Salvation Army didn't take any money. It didn't cost the taxpayers anything. It's all privately funded.
Would you rather give $200 to the Salvation Army or to the state government to solve a problem? That was what I said to get that bill passed. And everybody said, oh, I'd rather give $200 to the Salvation Army, because at least I know it's going to have a positive effect. But if I give it to my taxes, it'll go through all kinds of layers of bureaucracy, and then who knows where it's going to end up.
I make it all about public safety. We need to increase public safety, because the world is a lot safer that I'm sitting here after graduating from the Salvation Army Drug Treatment Program, because I don't commit crime, I don't take things that aren't mine, I don't even jaywalk. So I came down this mountain, turning right around a blind corner, and there was a car coming at me, coming in the opposite direction in my lane, and we hit almost head on. So I was injured, received several broken ribs, and which really manifested itself into a chest wall injury. The ribs were misdiagnosed. I continued to train with doctor's orders, and those broken ribs, when they're broken like that and you're breathing hard, starts wearing basically a hole, in the chest wall. And that's what occurred, is that the broken bones healed, but the chest wall did not. And after a year and a half of enduring, the pain of breathing, I ended up taking painkillers, which didn't last very long. I think it lasted a day before I relapsed. And that's the patience and the power of addiction, is that I picked up right where I left off. It wasn't easing into it like when you first get involved. It is like you just picked up like you were using up until the day before. And that's where I picked up. And I never went back to work from that day forward, and ended up committing a drug-motivated crime that sent me back to prison after 12 years of recovery. So the biggest lesson I learned there is that addiction is extremely patient. Don't ever forget who you are. And who I am is a drug addict. And drugs, as far as narcotics are concerned, they're like poison to me. I have an allergy to narcotics.
It broke my heart because I happened to be away, and his wife called and said he's relapsed. Now I got on a plane and came right back. I was in Chicago and went to the house, and he was there, and she was there. They were trying to talk him into just, whatever you stumbled into, stumble out of it, because we just can't continue this way. But he had a little backpack already packed, and I could see that he was not going to take, anything very seriously at that moment. He was high, and so I offered to sit him down, and I said, Jeff, come on, let me take you someplace where we can get you, free of this thing that's hanging on you right now. You know your way out of this, and you can do it. But he finally got to the point in the conversation where he just grabbed his backpack, got on his bike, and rode off. And we just sat there and said, well, what can we do? So we just prayed. It's the best we could do at that point.
Once again, Jerry never judged me. He was always supportive. Even through my relapse, he was always in my corner. He was the first person at my house. He was the first person to get me engaged in recovery again. So he's an extremely loyal friend. He is actually the godfather to my son Riley also. When I went through the first round of recovery, that was a process, and it was exploration. I knew better. I knew better this time around, and I did it anyway. And I remember just the day of my relapse, and I hear God speaking to me saying, don't do it, don't do it. It was like a voice that says, don't do it because I know what the consequences are. For the first 6 months, I would say, are the lowest 6 months of my life in that prison cell. But I stayed faithful. I used the tools that the Salvation Army taught me, and that one of them was that God never turns his back on us. Never does God turn his back on us. Now, it was me that turned my back on God, but he was always there. And I didn't hear from him the entire time. I didn't want for my son to see me in orange jumpsuits with Department of Corrections, on the back of it. I didn't want him to see me incarcerated. In Arizona, they have a hub where all prisoners go to. It's a high security prison yard. And so you are in your cell basically 23 hours a day. And rather than have bars, since this particular hub is in the city of Phoenix, so they want to, it's within the city, so they don't want to have bars and, look all archaic or draconian. So what they have are thin slits that are windows that you can't squeeze through, of course. But I was actually looking out that thin slit, and that slit was the Harbor Light facility right across the street. And that just gave me two different thoughts. One was, I remember that my time at Harbor Light was some of the best years of my life. We had it was some of the hardest times of your life, but it was also some of the best years of not only my life, but the hundreds of other people that I knew that went through there. And that's one thing that I also learned, is that we don't have this religious pushing of religion upon somebody. What the Salvation Army does is helps you develop a relationship with God. And my relationship was damaged. And you never know what you have until you don't have it. And I didn't have it. I didn't have that relationship. And I had to do it. I felt I had to do it on my own. But I knew two things. One is that if I was repentant, and I was sincere and repentant, and that I would stay faithful through the quiet time. If I continued to read my Bible, if I continued to pray on my knees, if I continued to seek God's guidance and direction, that he would reappear, and he did.
The Bible study group prayed for him, communicated with him, I think brought some strength and understanding to him.
I don't think there was any opportunity whatsoever to recover without the support, of the friendships that I had and had developed ever since I was a little boy. So it's like a combination. You have the Holy Spirit, you have your own resolve, and that usually is surrender. Your resolve is kind of the opposite. You have to turn, that you don't have the power to fight this, but God does. And then to have your support of your friends that believe in you, and they believe in you until you believe in yourself. It's kind of like the Salvation Army, loving you until you learn to love yourself. And by having Jeff not only there on the day that I was released, but he also visited me in prison, wrote me letters of encouragement, wrote me letters of biblical nature and scripture that maybe were helpful to him.
Well, it was a quiet, long drive to Globe, Arizona, and I didn't know what to expect other than, that he was going to come out and I would be there at a certain time waiting for him, which he did. He had his long hair and his ponytail, and, he certainly looked just like Jeff, but he looked like a prison inmate to me, and a lot of it had to do with just the way he kept his hair, which I didn't say anything about other than maybe give him a little bit of hard time about it, you know, because that's what we always do, give each other a hard time. But he was anxious for a big breakfast, so we went and stopped and had breakfast, and he devoured the bacon, but got full real quick because his stomach had obviously shrunk because he couldn't eat it all. By then I'd finished my whole plate. He was full. So he looked in great shape, you know, and a little bit nervous in that I think they give him $53 and say good luck. So if I wasn't there to pick him up, $53 may get you back to Phoenix.
It was about the second or third day that he'd gotten out of prison. And he rode, we had lunch at Mimi's, a place near here that I like, and he looked really different. I imagine he was 30 pounds lighter than the time I'd seen him before. He had long hair.
Steve I'd known since prior to going to prison. We were colleagues, very like-minded, and I was released from prison with the directive that I could not set foot in the city of Phoenix.
His hair was in a ponytail, and he was riding his bicycle, and it was raining. And I was pretty surprised at what he looked like, and he was struggling a bit.
I called Steve up and asked if he'd meet me for lunch, and we had lunch, and Steve says, "Do you have a job?" And I said, "I had a job, but I can't go to the city of Phoenix." So he looked at me and he said,
"Okay, well, I can hire you. I can find things for you to do." Jeff's a very multi-talented guy.
Now, he didn't have a position in his firm for me at that time, but he said, "I've got some work that I have around my house." And he gave me a key to his house. He entrusted me with the key to his house 2 days after prison. And that will never leave my mind. I'll be loyal to Steve to the end of time because he entrusted me.
And then he still works. First, I just hired him privately, and about a month later, we hired him at the agency. And he's still here.
But then a position opened up, and I was what is called a courier and custodian. So I would get up early and ride my bike to the office, and I would clean the office very early in the morning. And for the next year, I fixed anything from air conditioners to plumbing to other electrical problems. And I don't know how to do these types of things. But you know what? God does. It's the funniest thing. Things would break down, and I would say, you know, "God, I don't know what I'm doing here." And boy, I'd get on the internet, and pretty soon I know how to fix it. But it was God's guidance and direction that said, "Hey, you know, somebody on the internet knows how to do it. You know, I'll direct you." And I'm like, "Hey, great idea." So in that year that I was fixing, I don't think that we had a single air conditioning bill, plumbing bill, or electrical bill in that year. And I'm not an electrical guy. I'm not an AC tech. It just worked out great.
We expanded in 2011 to work with people coming out of prison.
So as Steve saw where my real heart was, and that was really helping those that were in the same positions that I were, whether they're on the streets of Phoenix, whether they're surrounded by poverty, low education, drug addiction, women at risk of losing their children due to addiction. I just have a real heart of educating our lawmakers, and I think it was time, because my relapse was very well known and very well publicized. And there's a level of trust that has to be restored. And so I started going back to the legislature very slowly and just kind of being seen and just kind of testing the water. And the experiences were very positive, so I got more and more involved, whereas Steve switched my position to be their community liaison and really the person to handle their public policy.
So his job title is community liaison. And he works with, I'd say Jeff's main focus is always trying to change public policy for the common good, and particularly focusing on those people who are hurting or disenfranchised. Jeff helped get that original legislation passed in 2002 for that program. It's mandated by legislation, and it's for people who are coming out of prison, low-risk people, to get case management and counseling services for 90 days to help them with reentry. Jeff now does the orientation for those people. When they first come to SAGE, we have a meeting with them a couple hours long and help orient them. And so he tells them his story and shows them that we're really advocates for him. And he loves that. He never wants to miss that. Those are the people Jeff cares about the most.
Steve Grant, who's my employer, who hired me 2 days out of prison, and he gave me a key to his house to do some work around his house. And then he hired me as a janitor. And now I'm a little bit. Happy birthday to you. Happy lot of people don't know people, you know, from table to table to table, but that common thread is people that are very important to me and that never give up on me. And for those of you that don't know, not giving up is that the first time you go to rehab, which was 19 years ago, in 1995, it was strongly recommended by the state of Arizona, Superior Court, that is, of the state of Arizona, that I attend and graduate drug treatment here at the Harbor Light program. I grasped onto recovery. I fought it a lot. I tried to leave here a couple of times. My counselors came down late at night to keep me here because I thought there might be a better way, as Linda said, that I always thought that I could outsmart this program. I'm very grateful that the Salvation Army saved my life because there's no question I would be dead or in prison the rest of my life. Probably dead.
Salvation Army gets a lot of credit, it seems like, for Jeff's story. However, all we did was to provide the opportunity. It was Jeff making the decision to enter that Harbor Light Center that many years ago. If he had not made that decision, we probably would not be sitting here this evening. There's another gift that this group here is going to offer to you, and you're going to take the lead on that.
Everybody would like to stand, you'll sing it even better. We've gathered here to celebrate the God we all hold dear. He's traveled wide and back, but now his way is crystal clear. Tonight, high fives from friends and family, officers and peers, as he goes marching on. Today he tells the story of a bush he held so dear. No judge will even share a joke or cause him any fear. But then there came a miracle, he met our shed a tear, and he went marching on. Addictions, jails, and prisons, God is bigger than them all. He showed his grace and mercy through our friends who heard his call. Today he's changing lives.
But then at the party last night, and to have all my friends there, you know, for my birthday party, you have no idea how people view you until you give them a microphone and you put them up in front of everybody to tell them and ask them how they view you. And what's it like, you know, to have the support of your friends. And I think that it has been a gift. I am undeserving of that kind of support and love. I know that I'm undeserving of God's grace, and He's teaching me how to feel deserving.